What effect will Governor Ron DeSantis's Martha's Vineyard immigration antics have on resolving America's decades-long, never-ending immigration crisis? Join Richard Ebeling and me in this week's Libertarian Angle as we address that question. I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation. This is this week's Libertarian Angle, the show that y'all know brings you the principled, uncompromising case for libertarian principles, the libertarian philosophy, usually in the context of the burning issues of the day. I'm joined by my co-host, Richard Ebeling, professor of economics at the Citadel. Richard, good to see you again.
Great to see you and our viewers and listeners. Glad they could join us.
Yeah, nice to have you all joining us. Richard, we have addressed the issue of immigration many, many times in the many, many years that we've been doing this weekly Libertarian Angle show. And of course, we've addressed this issue for practically the whole 32 years of FFF's history. And it is clearly still a burning issues of the day. We most recently discussed it, but I figure, in the context of what just happened with Martha's Vineyard and with these kind of antics that are obviously going to continue, I think it's important that we continue addressing this issue. And just to kind of bring everybody up to date, I'm sure everybody's aware of it, but you have this episode where the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, used state taxpayer money that had been allocated to him to remove unauthorized aliens or immigrants from his state, which means to me deportation. He used that money to retain airplanes to the cost of hundreds of thousands of dollars to go to Texas to get immigrants there and then fly them via stopping in Florida, I think, so that he could say he technically complied with the law of Florida, flew them to Martha's Vineyard to make this big clownish thuggery message to the rich progressives who supposedly live on Martha's Vineyard that, oh, well, you all want open borders and you say you're so sympathetic to immigrants. Well, here, I'm going to just dump these immigrants in your front yard and you can display all your goodness here. Well, to me, it's just horrific. It's so typical mindset of some of these Republicans that these immigrants are just like trash or like animals or subhumans, where you can just pick them up and dump them off wherever you want in the country. And I mean, to the credit of the people in Martha's Vineyard, they really were kind to these people. They immediately provided them food and water and very, very nice to them. I don't know how long they stayed there, but they were ultimately shipped out to a military base. But to use people in this way, Richard, I mean, I grew up around illegal immigrants. We hired them on our farm in South Texas. When I went back to practice law, I represented a lot of them for free. I mean, these were the most genuine, hardworking, kind people I've ever encountered in my life. And to see somebody treating them in this fashion as this guy DeSantis does, and as Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, is doing, is absolutely disgraceful in my mind. And what the irony in all this is that this crisis that is supposedly existing here on the border is a direct result of the system of immigration controls that these people support. I mean, we've been arguing that for 32 years, that you've got a socialist system here. It's based on the socialist principle of central planning. The bureaucrats allocate how many immigrants can come in, how many refugees can come in. And so when you have this kind of central planning system, you're going to have what Ludwig von Mises called planned chaos. I mean, what better term to describe what's been going on the border, not just recently. I've seen this immigration crisis my entire life. First, I lived almost half my life on the border, and it's never gone away. And they keep saying, oh, well, if we just had comprehensive immigration reform, everything would be hunky-dory. That's ridiculous. They have had comprehensive immigration reform over the years. They made it illegal to hire illegal immigrants. I mean, it used to be legal to hire illegal immigrants. But when they had their comprehensive immigration reform, they said, oh, well, we'll just make it a felony for American employers to hire illegal immigrants. Well, how did that work out? Then they also made it a felony to transport and harbor illegal immigrants, which may have been a factor on why those people in Martha's Vineyard may not have been willing to take some of those people into their homes. It's a felony if you take an illegal immigrant into your home and you provide some shelter for them. And the best example of this was a guy named Scott Warren out in Arizona. He got prosecuted for helping out immigrants that had crossed the desert for 2 days. He gave them shelter, he gave them water, he gave them food, and the feds went after him with a vengeance, prosecuted him for a felony. And the greatest thing about that case is that the jury came back in with a not guilty verdict. It was a pure case of jury nullification. But the fact is, they've made it a felony. Don't tell me that they haven't had comprehensive immigration reform. The problem is that no matter what reform they adopt, the system has still been chaotic and in crisis. And that's inherent. It's an inherently defective system. As you and I have argued, oh gosh, as far back as 1990, our first year, and one of our first books, as you know, Richard, that you and I co-edited is called the Case for Free Trade and Open Immigration. There's only one solution to this, and that's open borders. Now, I'm not talking about the so-called open borders that the Republicans are accusing President Biden of having. That's ludicrous. That's not open borders. Biden even, they just announced, is going to extend Trump's wall. And they continue to arrest people. They continue to incarcerate them. They continue to deport them. A system of open borders is no more border patrol, no more immigration officials, no more ICE, no more controls at all, just free movements of goods, services, and people across borders the same way we have domestically. We don't have controls on the people coming from Maryland into Virginia. That's what open borders means. So these people take their system that necessarily produces crises, and they engage in these clownish thuggery antics of treating people like trash or animals or subhumans. It really is a dismal picture here, Richard. And until Americans finally realize that it is their system that is defective and that the only system that's going to work is open borders, I think we're going to just continue seeing more of this. What do you think?
Well, if I could make an analogy, let us suppose the following scenario. The U.S. government has certain federal allocated and funded welfare programs. There are also state-level welfare programs. And let us suppose that some of these states, which is the case, are more generous with welfare payments than others, implying that the people, or at least the elected representatives in those states, think that generosity should be even greater than in other states. So let us suppose that the governors in the states who are, quote, more conservative in their welfare payments were to say, well, you know what? If you want to support this system and you want to even be more generous out in California or other places like that, we're going to round up our welfare recipients and we're going to put them on buses and planes and we're going to send them to California. We're going to send them to New York. We're going to send them to all these other states that are more generous in combination with the mandatory federal redistributions, more generous than we at the state level are. And see really if you think that this is a good system. It's the same, the logic, it's the same type of a stunt. But how would people react if American citizens who were on the benefiting side of these redistributions, American citizens, residents, legal residents of those states, were boarded on planes or packed on buses and just randomly picked up? Well, you're a welfare recipient, you're a bum. And therefore, we're going to put you on a bus or a plane and we're going to send you to California. And then the Californians, They can take care of you with their more generous welfare system than ours. Do you think that people would be as complacent, as deferential, as non-protesting about this? What creates this illusion is that, well, it's these foreigners, and let's suppose that in the 1840s, when the Mexican War occurred, and the United States annexed the northern one-third of the territory of Mexico, that instead, as a variety of congressmen and senators proposed at the time, all of Mexico had been annexed. And that therefore, what are now like the states of Mexico were just more states in the United States because all of Mexico had been annexed. And now all these people from Chihuahua or Baja California or the Yucatan, they just freely moved to the other northern, north of Rio Grande states of the common country. Would people be complaining about this? These damn Yucatan people, these damn Baja California people, oh, these damn Chihuahua people, oh, goddamn. No, because it's just one country and it's just taken for granted that they just move around. But there's this artificial line drawn on the maps of the world, political artificial lines called borders and boundaries. And this is viewed as they talk about sovereignty, which means the government of that nation state claims control over all people in that country. That is, they don't let you leave the country without a passport, and therefore, under the implicit assumption, there are no legal restrictions preventing you from leaving the country. And you cannot enter the country, not only with a passport issued by the government, but you have to have a visa issued by the State Department. And that therefore there's this arbitrary thing. You know, for example, there have been movements in Canada, particularly out in Saskatchewan and Alberta, the more, quote, conservative provinces of Canada, have proposed to secede from Canada and submit being annexed by the United States, so that Saskatchewan and Alberta would now become the 51st and the 52nd state of the United States. Now, these Canadians would just be moving back and forth between those areas, and Idaho and North Dakota and Montana. Would anybody care? No. It's this artificiality of these state borders. Nobody would counting the people moving back and forth. Nobody would be concerned about import-export balances between what are now the two additional states of the United States, et cetera, et cetera. There's all this artificiality, but beyond this artificiality, the citizen of another country is viewed as somehow less human than the citizen of your own country. And it's not just the United States that does this treatment. Let us not forget that there are many people from the Middle East or North Africa escaping from poverty, war, oppression, civil wars, that have attempted to find peace and greater personal security for themselves and their families in the European Union. They try to cross the Mediterranean in these little boats, and they're pushed back off the Italian coast, the Spanish coast, the Greek coast. And if the ships sink, well, if we save a few people who are drowning in the water, that's nice. But they're not our citizens. They're not part of our common European Union. They're not. They shouldn't be viewed and treated and have the same respect as our common citizens. That's the mentality that's behind this. And when you say that they're this treated as if somehow less than human, you said animals. Implicitly, it is the mindset of these people. It is the artificiality of political barriers, the interventions of borderlines on a map that create these crises and nothing else. If I can just continue one more thing, Jacob. Our Declaration of Independence says all men are created equal. It doesn't say people from New York State and from Virginia, but not people in Ohio or England or Mongolia or Dakar or Venezuela. All men are created equal. They are endowed with certain unalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, pursuit of happiness for Americans has taken them all over the United States and in many other parts of the world. Well, if you believe in that universal ideal that all men have these inherent individual rights to have control and movement over their own person and their destiny, then to try to say that these people are somehow more equal than others, and these people who are less equal than us can be treated in these ways or just shunted aside or placed behind cages, is in fact an affront to the founding ideals of the country and a shocking disregard for just the common sense dignity of another human being.
Yeah, you make a lot of good points. I especially like your point about Mexico because, you know, here's all this fuss today, Richard. Oh my gosh, these people from Mexico are coming in to get jobs and try to improve their lives. Well, as you point out, the United States essentially stole. You say it's a third. I think it's closer to half, the whole half, northern half of Mexico. That they wanted it, and Mexico refused to sell it to them. I mean, here's the U.S., the arrogance of saying, we'd like to buy the northern half of your country. And Mexico says, well, it's not for sale. Okay, so we'll gin up a war. And that's what Polk was doing with those troops down there in Brownsville. He was stoking up a war to give him the excuse to steal this country, or the northern half of the country. So while Americans today are complaining about this influx of Mexicans, this is a country that absorbed the entire northern half or northern third, whatever it is, of Mexico, including all the inhabitants. They immediately became American citizens. And I mean, I wonder now whether these people that are so complaining about these Mexicans coming in would be happier if we just gave this whole northern half back to Mexico, where the Mexicans could then have their country back and feel comfortable going into Texas and California like they're doing today. You know, this notion that you can absorb the entire half or third or 40% of a country and think that everything is going to be normal after that's ridiculous. You have everybody was speaking Spanish. That was their native language. Their culture, their laws, everything. In fact, in my hometown of Laredo, as I understand it, the city council meetings for decades were conducted in Spanish. That was their native language. Today, I would estimate that maybe 20 to 25% of the people of Laredo do not speak and write English. And the reason I say that is because when I was practicing law there many years ago, back in the 70s, when the jury panel would come in, the judge would ask who cannot speak or write English. And about 20 to 25% of the people in the jury pool would raise their hands and they would be disqualified. And of course, the judge was there. Everybody was always very kind and considerate. It was like no big deal. And I think your point about normality is very good too. If you had a system of open borders today, well, let me back up a minute. Right now, if you go over to the Potomac River over there, the Beltway, you know, you see all these cars coming in from Maryland. I mean, thousands of cars. Nobody cares. Nobody keeps track of them. Nobody's thinking, oh my gosh, how many terrorists in those cars? Oh my gosh, how many Muslims are in those cars? Oh my gosh, how many thieves are in those cars? Oh my gosh, they're coming in, they're going to steal jobs away from Virginians. It's just normal that all this huge influx of people. Well, if you had open borders on the southern border, that's exactly what it would be tomorrow. You open borders today, people would just be coming in, traveling around. You wouldn't know who was a Mexican citizen. Do you know who a Mexican citizen is today? Do you know who is any non-American citizen? You don't go and ask people for their papers when you're talking to them. Here in Virginia, there's a lot of people that speak with an accent. I've never seen anybody in any store, Walmart, Home Depot, or anything say, can I see your papers to make sure you're legal? You see people speaking Spanish at McDonald's back in the kitchen. You don't ask them, can I see your papers? Nobody cares. You just deal with people as human beings. And that's the way it would be with open borders. There'd be people crossing back and forth. They retain their citizenship. There's no reason why somebody has to become an American citizen. He comes here and tours and visits. I mean, imagine if you had, millions of people coming here on summer vacation, Richard, from overseas. Who would complain? And let's say they're just coming for a month. Who would complain? Everybody'd be making money off these people. And it's the same thing with respect to just the standard of open borders. Nobody would care. It would be the norm. I mean, it really is the ideal solution to all of this.
Yeah, the bugaboos in this, which we've talked about before when this issue has come up, somehow they're different. They speak a different language. They're a different culture. They have, in some cases, a different religion. They look different. But, you know, we've been through this how many times in American history? The particular country or countries from which the immigrants come have changed over time. But it's the same absurd arguments. Oh, they'll never assimilate. Oh, they'll never learn English. Oh, they'll never be loyal to the United States. Oh, you know, you know, what is it? You know, the famous line, you know, send you know, on the Statue of Liberty, but, you know, give us your tempest tossed and your refuge. I mean, who wanted an opportunity in America? People with means and education, but historically, many of those at the lower end of the income and educational brackets, because they knew that they could never have a chance to have a better life for themselves in, quote, the old country, because of class distinctions, political barriers, economic rules and regulations. But here in America, you were poor, you didn't know English, but you were able to scrape the money and get together or borrow the money from other friends or family members and come across on steerage, right, the bottom of the boat. And you got across to America, you landed here, and it didn't matter. You might still fail, and things might not work out the way you wanted. But here, there were a wide corridor of potential opportunity to have your chance as an individual that you could never have in the old country. And the people coming today are no different. And I know we've talked about this many times, but it needs to be emphasized. They're escaping today as much as our ancestors did due to political oppression, religious persecution. Just think about the people in Middle Eastern countries who do not want to live under the egregious religious restrictions in Afghanistan or Iran. Maybe the viewers have seen the latest thing. A young girl about 20 years old would not wear the headdress in Iran, and the morality police, that's what they're called in Iran, the morality police arrested her and seemingly beat her up, and she collapsed and died just because she wasn't covering her head. And now they've had these demonstrations of other young women in Tehran and other Iranian cities taking it off as a protest statement against what has happened to this young woman. And 7 people are dead. Others are badly beaten up. That's what people are escaping from, and they have escaped from that for centuries. And America was the haven where you didn't have to worry that you would be persecuted for your religion, you wouldn't be oppressed because of your political views, you wouldn't have to see your family live in poverty because of the economic rules and regulations and barriers to opportunity. Here you had your chance. You may not achieve what you wanted in your lifetime, but maybe your children or grandchildren would have that better life. These people have the same vision, the same hope, the same want, and that is what the quote the Native Americans, by which I don't mean Indians, but those who were born here or whose parents came here earlier, they have this idea of entitlement that we got here first, and others cannot have the same opportunities and chances that our parents and great-grandparents and great-great-parents came here for, and which has enabled us to have the life of ease and comfort and wide latitude of freedom that we take for granted. It is a shocking hypocrisy of either disregard or ignorance.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the Statue of Liberty in the poem on the Statue of Liberty, the Emma Lazarus poem, because you're right. The statue, I mean, the Declaration of Independence, which we celebrate on the 4th of July, says that all men are endowed with certain fundamental God-given natural rights. These pre-exist government. And if we really believe that, then that adheres to everybody, all immigrants, and I believe it. So foreigners have the right to pursue happiness. We don't normally talk about the pursuit of happiness in this country as a right, But that's what the Declaration says. That's what we celebrate. Well, what is pursuing happiness except to move to another country and seek a better life? I mean, that's what every one of those immigrants is doing. They're pursuing happiness, which is a natural God-given right that no government, not even the American government, can interfere with. And Richard, when that poem on the Statue of Liberty talks about the wretched refuse of your teeming shores and send your homeless tempest tossed, we're talking about the poorest of the poor in this world here. I mean, that's what the 19th century was so remarkable. I mean, we know there were some bad things like slavery, but there were some good things. And one of these good things was this policy of open immigration. No country had ever had such a thing. And it lasted for about 100 years. But notice that, with all this acclaim that the mainstream media is doing about Queen Elizabeth and the royalty and all the pomp and so forth. Notice what it says here on the Statue of Liberty. Keep your storied pomp. We're not interested in that. We want your homeless, your tempest tossed. Send them to us. That's a remarkable statement. Just a remarkable statement. Now, I watched the first hour of Ken Burns' new documentary on immigration controls and the Holocaust. And Richard, I've only watched an hour, but it's a stunner. I mean, I was shocked. I mean, this thing is really well done, at least for the first hour. They emphasize America's system of open immigration throughout the 19th century, and they emphasize these what would be considered by many even today and back then dregs of society. They got pictures of these poor immigrants. You can tell these people have nothing. They can't speak English in many cases. It's phenomenal that they were coming in droves, thousands. And then the U.S. and the progressive movement at the later part of the 1800s decides that they don't want Chinese immigrants. They're different. And that was the first time that they enacted a law to keep out immigrants. Imagine, from the founding of the country all the way to, I think, 1888 or something. They finally passed this law, says we don't want any more Chinese. And then the ball starts getting rolling. And what's fascinating is they talk about the eugenics movement, which was essentially a system that said we want more superior people here in the United States. We want better people, the sort of a superior race. So they go off, and we've talked about this before, they start sterilizing people that they considered of lower quality, like imbeciles or whatever, so that they couldn't reproduce. And then the program ties in this eugenics movement with increased immigration controls, because the mindset is we don't want people from those Eastern European countries. They're poor. They're a lower class citizen. They're going to pollute the purity of American culture. And then this documentary ties us in with Hitler, that Hitler looks at this and says, look what America's doing. I'm going to do it here in Germany too, with this eugenics movement. We need to get rid of the dregs of society. And he considered a dreg a Jew. And well, guess what? The U.S. is doing the same thing at the same time Hitler's doing. They're trying to rid our society, the American society, of Jews by keeping them from coming here. And so they have this quota system that they impose on Germany. So here's Hitler saying, I'm willing to let them go, and nobody's taking them because they all have these immigration controls, including the U.S., because they consider Jews to be inferior, and we don't want them to pollute even more American society. So, Richard, I don't know how this thing's going to go, but right now, the immigration control advocates are going to have a very interesting time dealing with this documentary, at least insofar as the first hour is concerned.
Yeah, I've had a chance to watch, it runs for 2 hours. I watched part 1, and yesterday I watched part 2. And what you see is that as the 1930s progressed, the U.S. State Department increasingly intensifies its restrictions on the ability of people living under or attempting to escape from Nazi tyranny from coming to the United States. They set the bar so high that by 1937, 38, 39, it is virtually impossible for more than a handful of people to successfully gain entry legally into the United States. The harshest restrictions often were against those of a Jewish, a religious, or family background. There was a conscious attempt by a variety of people in the State Department. It was the State Department responsible for following the rules and issuing visas in keeping as many of, quote, them out of the country as possible. It is a shocking and an embarrassing episode in American history. Not that this is new. There is an excellent book that came out, must be now 25 or 30 years ago, called Paper Walls, which deals with how the immigration laws were used against Jewish immigration to the United States in the 1930s, really up until America's entry into the war in 1941, and the human tragedy that this entailed. But they say that a picture is worth 1,000 words. And Ken Burns, who has produced a variety of such excellent documentaries, that we talked about this last week, as one about the Civil War, about jazz, and so on. This one is equally impressive, and the fact that also interviewed there are a variety of people who were either very small children who were lucky enough to escape, either themselves or their whole families, or often not their whole families, or who are the children who came and their parents told them. So it's the personal interest angle as well as just the history, and it is exceptionally well done. And while in part two, those who are perhaps somewhat critical of American foreign interventionist policy may not be as empathetic for some aspects of Roosevelt's policies that the narrator talks about. Roosevelt is shown to be someone who was a pragmatist, who was bothered by what was going on in Europe, but was more concerned with staying in power and staying on the good side of the Southern Democrat members of the Senate who were the chairman of important committees to get his legislation through. So he was more concerned with his domestic legislation and other things than pushing the State Department to free up some of the quota limitations, because it would upset members in Congress whose support he needed for other things. So it's, let's put it this way, it does not show Franklin Roosevelt in the most positive light.
All right. Well, on that fine note, we're out of time, and so we'll wrap this up. Again, if you want to know more and try to understand more about the libertarian concept of open borders, it's all there on our website at fff.org. Invite you all to come and read all the stuff we've written over the last 32 years. And Richard, our book, The Case for Free Trade and Open Immigration, I think it's still a timeless book. I think it still applies today. So on that note, thank you so much for tuning in. Thanks for your great support of FFF. We've got our conference coming up on monetary policy, ending inflation and the Fed. That'll be early October. Richard, enjoyed the conversation as always, and I'll look forward to talking to you next week.
Until next time.